Tonight, on a very special episode of Judge Bones.
If I do get vaporized, there will still be cubes for my boys.
The cookie shall continue until morale improves.
Judge, I knocked the top two cards of my deck off, and they showed up face up, and now what do we do?
Yeah, this is magic. You do a lot of homework, and then someday you can understand.
Judge Bones saved my marriage.
I always ask Bones, and he never tells me. He's just like, that's not my job, and I don't listen.
And then a couple years later, the judge program exploded.
Joe has already been the Joe, so now you can be the whoever you are.
Well, I gotta sell it and make $20 a profit.
Bones have needs.
You can't handle the truth.
Oh, yeah, Mark Rosewater was right. This is hard.
You hear that sound? That signals the beginning of a new episode of Lucky Paper Radio. My name is Andy. I'm here as always with my co-host, Anthony, Alcohol Judge Maddox.
If you have questions about what's the pick, I'm here to help. That's not what judges are for.
First of all, that's not what judges do, just to start there.
I always ask Bones, and he never tells me. He's just like, that's not my job, and I don't listen.
Okay, well, let's just go ahead and introduce our guest. We are joined by a legend of the pod, somebody whose reputation precedes him, the designer of Iganjo Drift and Amankar Desert Cube and many other fascinating cube projects. The Sticker Cube is one thing I always associate with you, and the de facto head judge of every cube tournament that matters. We're joined by Judge Bones.
Hello, it's me.
An actual judge. So now that you're here, what would a judge do in an actual tournament if the player called them over during the draft and said, Judge, what's the pick?
I can't give them actual advice.
Oh, obviously. But I'm saying, do you report them for asking a ridiculous question?
When you say actual tournament, you're talking about?
Something competitive REL.
Oh, I'm just not going to say anything to them.
Just no words?
Yeah.
Disengage.
Just walk away?
Yeah. Well, I would say something to the effect of, I can't tell you that. Or maybe I say the name of a card that's not in the pack.
But they wouldn't get in trouble for asking that question.
I don't think so.
Interesting.
Maybe I'll look it up. I'm so used to judging at Cube REL.
Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit maybe because of our scamp Daniel, our local rascal Daniel this weekend, just flying in the face of all judging recommendations. But we have you on the show because you have judged how many Cube events to date? Do you know off the top of your head?
I do, because I wrote it down earlier. This weekend was my 10th.
10th. That's awesome. So the Saltbox here in Baltimore this past weekend. Upkeep New York before that. Boston Cube Party last year. All 3 years of California Cube Champs? It was living 2 years of California Cube Champs. What else? Washington Cube Champs?
Nope. Steel City Cube in Pittsburgh.
Right,
and
Vertex.
Philadelphia. And
yeah.
I'm including the 3 CubeCons because they're Cube events.
Yes, they definitely count, for sure. They're all Cube events.
They're different sizes, but they're still Cube events.
Yeah, and in all but the CubeCon events, you served a role as head judge, basically, or in some cases, the only judge at these smaller events.
Or co-head judge at one time.
Yeah, and I am interested in talking about, first of all, just your experience judging Cube events, because I know it's probably very unique compared to judging other types of Magic events, and I think that experience will be interesting to people. I love the I love the emergence of all these cool Grassroots Cube events, and I know that obviously by numbers, our average listener is not going to organize their own local Cube event, but I hope out there that some people are listening that have considered organizing their own Cube event in their own city, their own town, their own country, and I would love for them to hear a little bit about what that experience is like from you, who has been part of the core organizing team for a lot of these events. Now, you've never been the actual organizer, so there's always somebody in these towns that is finding a venue and, figuring out how to sell tickets and all that kind of stuff, but nevertheless, all the other logistics are things that you've had a hand in basically as a primary judge at these events.
And I think you've definitely carried a lot of your previous knowledge from the other events, things that you've learned, and brought that along to sort of support new events, especially with newer organizers.
Definitely, yeah.
Is it worth defining a little bit what a Magic judge is? Because I know our listeners are all probably pretty enfranchised, pretty into Magic, but if you're not playing at organized tournaments, like, Magic judges might not be what they sound like they are. I mean, they definitely aren't what I sort of expected they were when I started playing the game.
Yeah, sure. So a magic judge is someone who facilitates the event, who is here to assist the players in playing the game. So that can include, my opponent is not here. It's not your job to go find your opponent. It's the job of someone who is here to facilitate the event. So if there's no judge, that could be like the TO. Or if the TO is too busy, then maybe you go do it yourself. But in an event with a judge, I would go, try to find your opponent, see what the deal is. Or most commonly, if you have a rules question, I'm here to answer your rules question. This is helpful because the other option is you ask your opponent, and they have sort of vested interest in maybe answering your question partially or something. So you want a neutral party.
It's helpful to have, someone outside the game.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, even if your opponent is acting in complete good faith, like, they are pretty likely to be wrong in a lot of cases. And the number of times I've seen a Magic player confidently say the wrong thing about a rules interaction, way too many times. I can count it on many, many fingers. Yeah.
So there's that, and then there's also like knowing we're going to time, the overtime procedures. So it's 5 additional turns. This is turn 0, that kind of thing. Just keeping everything running smoothly, being kind of a comfort to the players. Like, I don't know what to do in this situation. Well, I'm here and I will help you with it.
Except for making draft picks.
Correct.
No help there.
There is a limit. Yeah, I mean, I think that one job of the judge is if something goes wrong, like, you might have to hand out punishment. Like, that's what the name judge kind of sounds like to a lot of people. That is part of it, but for the most part, you're just there to facilitate people playing games and having fun. And I think that a very common thing that comes up is people make a mistake and then don't notice for 2 turns. And having a neutral party there to be like, okay, how can we make the best and like solve this in a way that feels most fair to both players? And no one's being punished. It's just about making the game make the most sense and having the most fun. And if you haven't played an event with judges, that's an awesome resource to have, to be honest. And it's something that I really appreciate about playing and in these like casual but supported contexts.
Yeah, I remember when I first got into Magic, I assumed that a Magic judge was just somebody that was so good at the rules that they understood all the rules interactions, and that it was just somebody that sat there and solved rules questions all day. And then the better you get and the more you play it, like, judged events, you're like, oh no, you're just there to basically solve the problem when somebody's like, Judge, I knocked the top 2 cards of my deck off and they showed up face up, and now what do we do? Right? It's like you're solving those kinds of problems for the most of the day, and then occasionally a rules thing comes up. But
my Oblivion Ring is in my opponent's deck.
Yeah, what now?
Yeah, there is a joke at the Grand Prix level where they're like circuit judges, and this is the main thing they do, that the number 1 role of a judge is picking up trash and pushing in chairs.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much like a community organizing kind of position, more so than the name would imply. The name definitely implies some degree of like, I'm just sitting on my throne here handing out judgments.
Why don't we have, I mean, there was like a stage at this event last weekend. We should have had a throne for you. That would have been so cool.
I would not have liked that.
Yeah, you're on your feet the entire time. You're like being on the floor. That's where you're in your element.
Exactly, yeah.
I'm just curious, before we get into the details of what these Cube events are like, just tell us a little bit about your history with Magic. I mean, I think maybe some people heard you on your friend Cade's, our friend Cade's great podcast, Recross the Paths. But for those that maybe don't know you, when'd you get started with Magic, and when'd you get introduced to judging?
So I first started playing Magic with a Guild Pact theme deck that I got from GameStop with store credit. And it was the Code of
the specificity.
Code of the Orzhov. And I took it home and I played it with my friend. And they had gotten the Boros theme deck. I don't know the name of that one. Something of the Legion, I'm sure. And we played against each other. And then we were both like, well, I like your deck a lot more than I like my deck. So I traded all of the cards I owned, which was that theme deck, for all the cards they owned, which was the Boros theme deck.
A whole collection swap.
Yeah, and they continued playing black control forever, and I continued playing red aggro forever.
Wow. You found your lane early.
Immediately. First product.
Well,
second.
First and a half product.
Okay, yeah. First product, asterisk. And so I started playing around, Time Spiral, then into Lorwyn. In Time Spiral, really funny thing, as the new sets come out, Time Spiral block has like 45 keywords in it. And I thought that as new sets come out, you have to learn like 20 to 30 keywords.
That was just normal. You're like, this is what a new set is like.
This is Magic. You do a lot of homework, and then someday you can understand.
And that appealed to you.
Apparently.
You said, yes, this is what I want.
And then like over the course of, I've been playing since 2006, I'm like, oh, that was a joke. All the cards that I first learned were inside jokes that I didn't realize were even jokes. I just thought, well, this is a really weird card, Ridged Kusite. Oh, it's an anagram for Guided Strike, and that's what it does because it's a spell shaper. Crazy.
Yeah, I feel like that's something Mark Rosenbauer talks about a lot is, a lot of enfranchised players really love these sets, and it's very hard for them to see, I think, the costs to newer players. And, you made it over that hump, but there were probably a lot of players that also experienced that, thought this is what every new Magic set is, and were like, I don't want to do homework for my hobby.
Yeah. Luckily, I stuck through it. So Lara comes out. I played, I continued playing just casually, never did anything competitive at any degree. And then I started judging tournaments at a local entertainment store called Hastings that I worked at. We were kind of running Friday Night Magics at the entertainment store, which is it's like a Blockbuster plus a Barnes & Noble plus a Hot Topic.
Sounds fascinating.
If you haven't heard of Hastings.
I have not.
It's just the 90s in one place.
Yeah, now it's out of business. But
I can't imagine why. Is it because every single part of their business model was completely destroyed by the technology boon?
I loved it. I enjoyed working there.
It sounds awesome.
And so anyway, we started doing Friday Night Magics there. I was the de facto judge because I knew how to play the longest at the time. And then,
but not a formal judge at this time.
No,
you were just the guy that knows the rules.
Correct. Yeah, I was just like the person who was most likely to have already seen this happen.
Mm-hmm.
So then from there, I helped open a game store in my college town, Ada, Oklahoma, East Central University. Shout out Tigers, I guess.
Rawr.
And we opened a store, and then I was, again, like the kind of the de facto judge, but we were running store events. And so it wasn't just like, we're running little F&Ms with free pizza in a video rental store. Like, now we're a game store, and we were running F&Ms, so it's a little bit more legitimate. And then we went down to Grand Prix Dallas-Fort Worth, back when there were Grand Prix. And over the intercom, there was a call for, if anybody's interested in becoming a judge, come to this banner and we will talk to you. So I went over and I was like, I'm kind of the de facto judge, but I'd love to formalize it if there's a way to do it. We had a little conversation with the regional coordinator at the time. And then I took a test and I passed. And so then I was level 1.
Just right there on the spot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was just a paper test. I can't remember, probably like 25 questions or something.
Mm-hmm. Became
level 1, went back to the store. And then I continued judging at that store. Then I moved to Tulsa. And then while I was at Tulsa, I met Cade of Recross the Pass, already mentioned. Shout out, Cade.
Shout out, Cade.
You don't have to say shout out when he comes up organically. That's not how shout outs work.
We all looked at you so you could also say shout out, Cade.
Shout out, Cade.
You don't want to give Cade a shout out, so what? You're like too good for that?
No, we should just celebrate Cade in the normal way.
And Cade had a study group for level 1 judges who were interested in becoming level 2. Cade was level 2 at the time. And so I joined Cade's study group. We got more familiar with each other, and then I finally was like, I think I'm ready to take it. And so he proctored my level 2 exam, and I passed that as well. So then I became...
And you've been best friends with him since, basically, right?
Oh, ever since, yeah. So then I was level 2, he was level 2, and then a couple of years later, the judge program exploded.
Well, the ends to all these stories are always so... Like, the idea of this place that was a Barnes & Noble plus a Hot Dog plus a Blockbuster where you have pizza for F&M, that's, I think, the apotheosis of Magic. That's what I want Magic to be. But now we have this anyway. This is fine. We'll have to make do.
We're reshaping Magic to our own taste here, aren't we?
What a great segue, Anthony. Let's talk about these Grassroots Cube events that you've been a part of. So at what point in this journey did you even get introduced to Cube?
So when I was at the store that I helped open, probably shortly after becoming a judge, if I'm honest.
And please be honest.
Maybe. I had read an article, which I think was by Melissa DeTora, but the timeline doesn't quite match up in the research I've done, so who knows. I read an article that was like, Cube doesn't have to be the MTGO Vintage Cube. It can just be cards you own. Here's how that might look. And it was like 60 of your favorite white cards, 60 of your favorite blue cards, and so on. 360
of your favorite cards.
Yeah, exactly.
End of story.
And I was like, I have all these cards that I love.
I have my favorite cards. That's why they're my favorite cards.
That I'm not doing anything with, but I just look at them fondly and then put them back in a box. And so I built my first cube, and then I'm somewhat rules-minded, as you can imagine. And I was like, well, it can't just be my favorite cards. There has to be a rule.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I was like, the rule is it's a budget cube, and every card is under $5. So I made a cube that was, in my mind, the best cards under $5.
Mm-hmm.
You might realize that this includes cards like Sol Ring, which aren't great for an environment.
Well, they're great for the person casting Sol Ring.
Yeah. So it had some flaws, certainly, but I loved it. It also became like a weird little stock market for me because, like, for example, when Dragons of Tarkir came out, I was like, ooh, Kolaghan's Command's awesome. I love how modal it is. I'm going to buy it because it is $3. And then Jun got a hold of it, and it was like $25. I was like, well, I got to sell it and make $20 of profit.
You refused to hang on to the cards that,
No,
that exceeded your budget cap?
I would sell them and buy everything that I was interested in that was still on the list. And so I just kept buying low and selling high by
definition, yeah.
The virtue of my own little market. And I was like,
structurally
oh,
have
man,
to do that.
I have to sell Olivia Voldaren again. I bought and sold Olivia Voldaren like 6 times. Because she kept being just good enough, and Jund would be just good enough, and then it wouldn't be good enough anymore. Anyway, that was my first cube, the budget cube. And then I was like, I have a lot of nostalgia for Lorwyn. I'll make the Lorwyn Morningtide set as a cube. And that ran into all the problems that Lorwyn Morningtide runs into, where it's just extremely complex on board, and everyone has analysis paralysis the whole time. And I just got to discover it myself, and was like, oh, yeah, Mark Rosewater was right. This is hard.
He is often right.
But then, eventually my budget cube ballooned in size as I loved cards and didn't want to cut them. So then it was a 720. And then one of the first conversations I had with you, Andy, on MTG Cube Talk Discord was, oh, here's my cube. And it's my Cube Cobra list of my budget cube, which is 720 cards.
Was it Cube Cobra at the time, or is it?
It actually may have been Cube Tutor at the time.
It probably was Cube Tutor, I'm guessing.
It probably was Cube Tutor.
And also, I got to say, I'm just terrified of where this is going, because you have a very good memory. I have no memory of this interaction at all, so I'm ready.
It's not bad for you. I was like, yeah, here's my cube list, so tell me what you think. I don't know why I wanted me to tell you what you think, because it's just all my favorite cards, and I'm not going to listen to anything you say.
I mean, fair.
So I was like, tell me what you think.
Tell me what you think. I hope you think it's cool, and then I'll feel good about myself.
I hope you're right. So this time it is 100 of each color card, 100 gold cards, 10 of each color pair, 100 colorless cards. We're at 700. We haven't hit lands yet. 20 lands. The lands were
2 of each color combination.
The lands were also not all color fixing. It was the white-blue creature lands from Zendikar block, and then like monocolor creature lands like Fairy Conclave.
I mean, I love creature lands.
And then 5 utility lands. So I had 10 fixing lands in 720 cards. And you said, this seems like it's going to be kind of hard to cast your spells.
Rude.
And I was like, no, it's like retail limited. It's fine.
I mean, that can be fine. That can be fine.
So anyway, I have gotten a lot better about cube design since then, but we did enjoy that cube for a long time as like almost like a battle box that you could just take a chunk out of. It does not matter. Synergy is all emergent. Nothing is planned. It's just my favorite cards. And you just play whatever with it. Like we just play directly off the top with lands from Exile. Yeah.
Awesome. And then you were just hooked on Cube.
Then I was hooked on Cube when this podcast started. I began listening to Cube podcasts more. I had no interest in Vintage Cube still, of course. And then I started listening to this podcast more. And now I'm here.
In the studio.
It's an incredible feeling. And then I was kind of getting, broadened to the concept of Cube. Whenever Hour of Devastation came out, I knew of the Desert Cube, the original Corrin's Desert Cube from user Loxodon Meyerark on the Riptide Lab forums, which had just been talked about on Reddit. It was just like the MTG Cube subreddit talked about it all the time. Is like, this is like the kind of context shift you can do in Cube.
One of the first kind of radical context shift cubes, at least that I'm aware of.
And then when Hour of Devastation released and it had this deserts theme, I was like, I've been interested in this for a long time. I bet it would be cool to design like a desert themed desert mechanical cube. And so then I started working on Amonkar, which at the time I just called the Amonkhet Desert Cube. Another one of our first interactions, you were doing Pack One Pick Ones. And I had noticed that you never did a Pack One Pick One of a desert. Like I went back through all of your episodes to re-listen to the Pack One Pick One.
Sure, yeah.
And then I emailed you, hey, I noticed you've never done a Pack One Pick One of a desert cube. Here's my desert cube if you want to do it. And then I, shortly after, did like a kind of a rebrand where I wanted Zendikar and Landfall to be important. And so I changed it to the Amonkar Desert, and I felt very clever about like merging the planes together, Amonkhet, Zendikar into Amonkar. And then I was like, oh no, I have to change the URL, and I sent Andy, I sent Lucky Paper Radio the wrong URL a long time ago. And so then I was terrified to change the URL until you did the Pack One Pick One. And so then I was just like waiting every episode, like, are they going to do my Pack One Pick One?
No.
So I could change the URL.
Oh,
but then you had like you had something weird thing with your email where you like lost, and you were like, if you have sent us a Pack One Pick One, we may have lost your email, so resend it. I was like, oh, perfect.
Yep.
I can correct it and send to you now.
Problem solved.
And there we go.
Yeah, I got the email right here. I'm looking at it. Wow. What a time capsule.
What's the time stamp on that?
May 28th, 2021.
Look at that.
So coming up on 4 years ago.
And then that cube got into CubeCon, and since then I've made a bunch more.
And you were a judge at the first CubeCon, yes?
Yes.
And that was just because you were really interested in Cube. This event popped up and you were like, put me in, coach?
Yeah. I had been doing more judging leading up to the beginning of COVID. I was actually signed up to do Grand Prix Houston, I believe, which was like March 2020, maybe April 2020. But it was like I was signed up for it, and then it was like, we don't know if we're gonna have this. This virus is getting pretty serious, and then they did cancel it. And so then there was like obviously they canceled all the 2020 events, and in 2021 they were like, okay, we're gonna start easing back into it. And then
I remember thinking about the first CubeCon, like, am I going to go to this, or is it like irresponsible? You know, this is after vaccines and everything, but I was still like, I don't know. So it's a different time. It's hard to like, I mean, obviously we're still the virus is still a very real thing, but it's hard to remember exactly how we all felt at that moment. Yeah.
And my understanding is that the first CubeCon planning was done in like 2019.
Yes.
And then it kind of got derailed.
It got booted a whole year, basically. Yeah.
So then 2022, first CubeCon comes, and I was signing up for different events to judge because I was like, I think it's time to get back into it. I applied for Magic Fest, and I applied for SCG events that I've never gotten so far. But I got into CubeCon. I was like, oh, this will be cool. We'll try it out. And then I had signed up, so then they had Cube applications. I was like, oh, I'll submit my Cube, and it got in. By the way, it got in. It was a double elimination situation. So I lost the first time I got pulled, and then in the losers bracket.
This was the voting system.
The voting system.
It was on Twitter at the time, yeah.
Yeah. And then in the losers bracket, I was like getting all my friends like, hey, please vote for my cube. I would really like, this is my last chance. I would really like for a desert cube to be there because it was the only desert cube at the first one. So
let's talk about these small scale cube events, because CubeCon is, I think, probably somewhere in between more like a GP or like a major Magic event, and these really small cube events, which are usually like 2, maybe 3 judges for 60 to 90 people, I would say, is like the average size of these sort of grassroots events we've been talking about.
I mean, you say that, but Boston Cube Party is going to be, 200 people next month?
Yeah, they got 200 apparently, so that should be interesting. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that, but we'll see how that turns out and how much that changes the vibes. But what is it like to judge an event like this? Like, how is it different from a typical Magic event? How would you describe the sort of vibes? And we've talked about these events a lot on the show, but how would you describe what these events are like from your perspective?
It's very different, and I tell every judge who will listen that it's the best event you can judge. The vibe is just completely different from other Cube events, and so many Cube organizers and Cube players are used to being collaborative about fixing things by themselves that it's just so nice. It's like I have watched players in competitive situations at these Cube events assist their opponent in finishing a combo that will kill them. Like, oh, I'm so excited that you have got all the pieces of KCI, let me show you how it kills me. Things like that. Like, totally.
You're saying that doesn't happen at a GP?
No, surprisingly, no. Zach Barish is a great example of just like, if anything accidental happens, he's like, oh no, I don't. He's like offended that you would even try not to fix it. He was like, obviously you didn't mean to do that. Correct it.
Yeah.
And so just that vibe is just so nice. Like, we're all here together to have a good time. And it is in a competitive structure, but it doesn't have any competitive trappings, basically.
Which, to me, it's like a shame that more Magic events aren't like that. But the fact that the Cube events are like that is a testament to why they're my favorite types of events to attend. Really, the only events I will probably ever attend again. It's hard to imagine me going to a Magic Con or a GP again. I mean, there's no GPs, but you know what I'm saying.
There's another thing that I tell other judges, which is that here, clarity and intent is more important than correctness, which is another thing that's different from other things.
What does that mean?
For example, how does Chaos Orb work in this cube? How does the Companion Rule work in this cube? And there are times where a question arises and I have to find the owner of the cube and say, what is the answer to this? I know the Oracle answer. I need your answer, which is so cool, I think, that like I just want to help execute the owner's vision of this. And I'm here to, like, yes, answer ambiguous rules questions that have definite answers, but not all questions do.
Yeah, I mean, that's also, I think, another huge, like, very sort of obvious difference between these kinds of events is, there are there are multiple levels of rules enforcement, right? There's like competitive REL, and at that level, here's how we handle mistakes, here's how we handle situations, and then casual. Is it just those two, casual and competitive?
Regular and competitive.
Regular and competitive. But is this kind of its own third tier of like, not only are you dealing with how do we want to handle rules issues, but also you're dealing with cubes that have custom rules and cubes that are played unsleeved and dealing with like unmarked cards in different ways.
And
like,
probably just card interactions that have never come up in any other Magic event of all time. Like, here's this uncard that someone has put on the stack, and then someone responded to it with this other card from this, like, just cards that would never coexist in any other situation.
Yeah, I have a whole list in my notebook of interactions that are crazy that I loved answering that probably would never have come up anywhere else.
Right.
And I love that you forgot the RL name regular.
Namespace pollution.
To say forgot, I didn't know there was ever a named one, so I
okay.
First I've heard of it.
Fair enough.
But is that something else that, like, how do you talk to other judges about the difference between that sort of aspect of it?
I mean, that's the main thing is, like, we're not here necessarily to, like, at competitive, you're here to administer penalties that are correct to keep the environment fair. You do not want to apply one penalty to a person and a different penalty to another person for the same infraction. That's the whole thing. It's like, keep it fair within the rules. And then you do still answer rules questions and things like that at competitive REL, but it's more about, like, a regional championship qualifier is like, for the regional championship, we are here to play very by the book and get, one person correctly and properly to the regional championship, whoever is first or second if it's a dual invite. And it's just a completely different vibe at these events. Like, yes, there is a trophy pin on the line, but
which people do care about.
But it's a lot less stressful for everyone, me and them.
Let's just real quick run down the structure of these events. Again, we've done this on the show before, but I'm hoping that maybe some people are listening to this because they got sent it by a friend or something, and they are interested in maybe running a small event of their own. Pretty much all these events run off of the Hedron Network, which is a web application that Gwen Decker, the designer and developer of Cube Cobra, built initially for the very first CubeCon and has since abstracted and made available to other Cube organizers. You'd have to just get in touch with Gwen directly if you were interested in using the Hedron Network. I'm not sure what those terms are like or whatever, but that is, everyone's been able to come to an agreement with Gwen to be able to use that software, and I think it's fair to say that it is definitional to how these events are run. Like, it determines a lot of what happens during the event. And what this looks like from a player's perspective is the event will have some number of cubes. They're all entered into Hedron Network, and then it'll also have some number of slots. Like, there's going to be 2 drafts on this day, 3 drafts on this day, 1 starting at these different times, and you will be able to go through and register for an event, and for each event choose which cubes you'd like to prioritize playing and which cubes you'd like to avoid if possible. And then Hedron Network will basically go through, take all the players registered for one of those events, and build them into pods. And those pods will then get to draft the cubes, and it does its best to try and get people their priorities, obviously, and does its best to make full pods and all that kind of stuff. And that's really kind of the big logistical challenge, I think, the Hedron Network solves, of just how do you get 60, 70 to 96 people into pods that are reasonable and fair based on their preferences, which is kind of invaluable. Then you play a draft, and there's a winner, and it's become kind of emergent in this world that the winners get a little pin, basically, to celebrate their 3-0, and these pins are highly sought after, and it's really cool to see sort of the spreading reputation of these pins as people have them on their backpacks from previous Cube events. It's like these little tiny mementos of events past. Anthony, I think, is one of the most comprehensive collections, I would probably say, of anybody.
My bag's getting a little heavy. But this started at CubeCon 2, and it was great because they didn't actually tell anybody. They just, as the first sort of draft slot was winding down and people were in their third rounds, judges and tournament organizers just sort of sidled up and put a pin in between the 2 players and said for the winner, and it was just this little trophy. And
which I think went back to like the Magic Online, like you trophy a draft, you get a trophy in Magic Online. Like, it has its roots in that, I think.
And after that first draft, it, like the vibe, there was suddenly this just like energy of everybody's like, oh, now I want to win at least one draft. And it's like, I have many opportunities, and I feel like willing to have a certain level of casualness because I don't need to win the whole tournament, but I want to win at least one pod. Yeah, and it's been really fun that people have sort of taken that on and made different pins for every event. And so, you meet people and it's like, oh, cool, you were at this and that and this, and that's the scary person in the room because they have 3 pins on their lanyard, and it really makes it a lot of fun.
Yeah, Theo was decked out.
That was crazy.
And then these events do, I think every one so far, unless I'm mistaken, has had a cut to a top 8, basically. So the best 8 players in terms of rankings. You accrue points as you're drafting and playing in all these different cube drafts, and then the players in the top 8 slots basically are put into a pod for the finals draft, and the winner of that draft is considered the winner of the event. One thing I think is interesting here, I'm curious to kind of get your perspective on this. One way in which these events are competitively very different from any other event is that if you were playing in a regional championship qualifier or whatever, as you play, you'll continue to be paired with somebody of the same record, of, the same sort of placement in the event, which means that all the best players, get kind of whittled out and end up playing each other more and more as you get to the top, which is, of course, the fairest way to determine who's the best player. You can't just randomly pair people. But in this event, because the priority is not competitive integrity, it's not, find the best cube player in the room, it's get people to play the cubes they want to play the most. That means that every time you're in a pod, that pod is just random people from the event. It could be Reed Duke. It could be, somebody that's playing their second cube of their entire life, right? That's entirely possible. I think that is one of the ways that the values of these events is enshrined structurally in the rules, but it does also make it that the competitive integrity is kind of maybe a little bit, I don't know.
It's at least different from what some people might be used to, right?
Mm-hmm. Over the course of the 3 rounds, it's still Swiss within the cube, so you are playing like record.
Yes.
But it's almost like the first 3 rounds of even a competitive event like an RCQ over and over. It's first round could be against anyone, second round more likely to be the same skill level, third round most likely, and then starting over.
Yes.
New cube.
Yeah.
And then you don't have that RCQ. You have that one time at the beginning, and you don't have it again for the rest of the day.
I feel like, again, going back to just sort of the spirit and values of the kind of people that are playing Cube, that kind of makes sense, though. I think that Cube players are used to, you open up a booster pack, and you're just going to have a weird all-red pack, or somebody's going to have all the bombs, and you're going to have nothing, and we're very willing to roll with the punches, because that's kind of the nature of Cube, and having a pod that's going to have, quirks and interests, but it's going to be fine. And you're just going to do your best and support each other and make sure people are understanding the board state and having a good time and handling those irregularities. I mean, treating them as a feature, not as a bug.
Exactly, yeah.
So let's get to we're already a half hour in, but let's get to sort of what I think is the meat of this conversation, which is, as someone who's been a part of organizing many of these events, what does it take behind the scenes to make one of these things happen?
So, yeah, I have a little note thing I'm going to reference. But there's questions for the organizers are, especially if they're a first-timer, is what's your structure going to be? You get to choose how many drafts are in one day. You get to choose how many days. It could just be a single-day event if you wanted to. Mm-hmm. The venue that is available to you shapes a lot of what the event is going to be like. So if it's in a local game store, you may have some amenities like access to snacks that you don't have if you're in a community center or in a hotel ballroom or in a church. So sometimes you may want to make a Costco run to bring things like they did at Boston Cube Party for the people to have between rounds. Vertex was catered and had food between rounds available. So there's just players have needs that are consistent across events, and you need to find ways to address those needs within a venue that may be very different from the last event run just like this.
Right. Yeah.
Another thing is how much are tickets? Is it for charity like Scott's event in New York City was? So that is going to affect ticket price, but it also may affect player willingness to pay a higher ticket price. What are the prizes? Sometimes everyone gets a playmat. Sometimes only top 8 gets a playmat. Sometimes there's no playmats at all. Is there a trophy for first? Are there pins, and what do they look like? Pins are pretty requested now. But in the early days, it was okay, CubeCon has done this. Are we going to do this too? And then Joe did it, and it kind of has become a thing. Yeah. How many judges do we need? At Vertex, we had something like 90 players, and it was just Greg and I as the judges. Now, congratulations, Greg has become a judge.
Yeah, Greg was not actually a judge at the time.
But at the time,
though he is now.
Was not a judge.
Yeah.
Shout
outs to Greg for becoming a judge.
Congratulations, Greg.
Woo! So yeah, we made it work. Being all in one room is huge. That's another consideration for your venue. Are you all in one room? At Boston Cube Party, due to some unforeseen circumstances, we ended up in 2 different locations. At Steel City Cube in Pittsburgh, we also were in 2 separate locations. We had some tables in another room. So that's going to affect a lot your ability to effectively judge those things with a lower head count, All in one room, much easier to manage, even with just 2. But, the number of judges is also going to affect their budget because the judges have to be paid and have to be provided for. So there's a lot of considerations that organizers have to put in. And I like you said, help them as much as possible, especially if they're a first timer. But they've all so far done a really stellar job navigating, basically unknown waters.
Yeah. I mean, we've said on the show before that I have no interest in running a cube event. It sounds very stressful to me. I've done some event organizing, many years ago in my past in a different venue, and I'm not very good at it. So I have a lot of respect for these organizers that, a lot of these events, you have to kind of you have multiple things that are all dependent on each other, and none of them is like the obvious first one to pick. And you kind of have to be like, well, we're just going to pick a venue. And then once we pick a venue, then we'll have narrow down options for what we can do for ticket pricing and for how many judges we have and for where we get the tables and all these other questions that sort of come in. You have this just cloud of vaguely interdependent things where you have to arbitrarily just make a choice, which feels scary and hard. So yeah, it's definitely a lot of work, but I think a testament to the fact that Greg and Joe and Ollie and Gwen and Max and Keldon, they're all very different people with different types of communities and different personalities, and they've all managed to pull this off completely successfully, right? I honestly probably the first Boston Cube party was the one that went the most wrong, in the sense that last minute they were oh, that space you said you wanted, you can't have it anymore, actually, even though we told you it was yours. Turns out it's actually under construction substantially.
It's being refloored.
Yeah, it's they didn't think of that when they didn't check the calendar when they went to go refloor things. And nevertheless, that still worked out totally fine, right? We ended up kind of scrapped together in a couple of different rooms. It was not as planned. It was a little tighter than as planned, but it was still a fantastic event, and we're going back this year. So even when things do go wrong, I think there's so much good about these events that it's hard to imagine it not being a great weekend no matter what happens.
Exactly, yeah. The Cube community spirit is very much okay, we acknowledge that this is not perfect. What can we do to help make it as good as possible?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, is this also a very different event just because the people are very willing to help and it does feel just like a community event? I mean, I'm thinking of just the very basics of, in this event we were at last weekend, Max was just I need help setting up. Everybody showed up, moved tables, set out chairs, and then same with breakdown. And in both cases, it took, 20 minutes because we had 30 people just helping.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not happening at a GP, right?
Exactly, yeah. It's a very different feeling, and it's really nice. At recent events, I have started dropping cubes off. Some of the most tricky time parts of these events is that all the players are seated for the first round draft, and we need to get 8 cubes to tables simultaneously, and we have 3 sets of hands. And it's difficult to get all those cubes started, shuffling, and underway at the same time. So I will take a cube to a table, and if I recognize someone there who I know it's their cube, or they have a cube in the event, or they've been at all these events, and I know them, and I will be okay, I am delegating you, Anthony, to cube captain. Please explain this cube and begin shuffling, and I will come back shortly. And then Anthony can begin explaining the broadcast shuffle, or just explaining, this is a desert cube. Has everyone done a desert cube before? And it just takes a little bit of load off of my shoulders that at a competitive event might feel strange to say, hello, player, you are in charge of these 7 other players.
Right, yeah.
So that has been super helpful, and then I just can kind of make the rounds and be checking on everyone to say, we run into issues? No? Okay, I'll come back, and then get everybody started. We have separate round timers for every single cube table, but we want everyone to have their fair 50 minutes, but if I put a global timer up, one cube is certainly going to finish drafting before the last cube finishes drafting, and it's going to make it unfair at some level. So we've had to do a lot of kind of ad hoc fixes as these events demonstrate their own uniqueness, but the community has made it very easy.
Yeah, that's a great point, that not only are you and other people that are helping run these events carrying sort of institutional knowledge and learned lessons from one event to the other, but also increasingly the players are carrying a lot of that knowledge. So you can, I think it is kind of to the point where they're thinking about this weekend, there's at least one player who's pretty familiar with what the routine is in every pod that you can definitely, explain how does Hedron Network check in, check out photos, explain shuffling, explain all these little details that somebody showing up to their first event wouldn't necessarily know.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of the check in, check out photos, I want to acknowledge and talk a little bit about what I think is maybe some people's first concern when they think about an event like this, which is just security for these cubes.
Maybe we should say explicitly at all these events, the cubes are volunteered by players, and it's not nothing to just give your cube to the event runner and say, let 40 people play this over the course of a weekend.
Yeah, and some cubes have a lot of monetary value in an absolute sense, and even the ones that are cheaper in a lot of senses, they have so much value to the cube designer for how much time they've invested in it. I think all the time about, like, if I took my Magic Cube to an event and, like, some cards were lost, that would really suck. If I take Ornithopters to an event and some cards are lost, like, that's devastating.
Irreplaceable.
Like, that. What do I do? Like, it's in some ways, like, the whole project is kind of, like, really, really messed up if that happens, because those cards are, like, valuable in a way that cannot be replaced. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just something that people obviously think about, right? Is what to do about security, or, worried about cards, going missing or whatever. Mm-hmm. Hedron Network took this into consideration, and so there is a sort of built-in requirement that after the draft, you just lay out your entire pool, so you can see every card in a nice grid, take a photo, and then continue with your deck building and playing all your matches. And then when you're done the draft, you do the same thing, right? Lay it all out again and upload another photo, and judge staff will basically confirm that they've gotten the right number of cards back from you at the end of the draft. And those deck photos then, theoretically, as far as I know, this has never happened at a Cube event, but theoretically, if a card did go missing, you could say, okay, well, let's trace this card across all these deck photos and figure out who the last person that had the, whatever card in their pool was, and then we know at least where to start the questions in terms of what happened to this individual card. And I'll say for my part, like, people have asked me before, like, how do you feel about bringing your cubes to these events, or even just to a local cube night? Do you not worry about these cards, getting stolen? And I truly don't worry about cards being stolen, right? Like, yes, anybody could do a crime to you at any time, right? But to me, like, it's honestly, I'm not any more worried about a card being stolen from my cube than I am about my wallet being stolen on the street, right? Like, it's just a thing that can happen, but I have absolutely no reason to think it's more likely when I'm bringing my cube out somewhere to a game store than any other crime that could happen to me. I am a little worried, and have definitely in the past had cards just fall on the floor, or, be under somebody's playmat and not realize. And so, like, when I give my cubes out at regular Tuesday night cubes, I do make sure I get 45 cards back from every person, which is truly just, like, not a distrust thing. It is like let's just make sure that there's not a card tucked in somewhere or whatever, because that has happened before. So the check and check out photos, I think, are a great way to basically just have a accountability train for these things. And I do want to just sort of reemphasize that these are such community-based events, right? Like, and I will say something that's really cool about Magic and cool about Cube is that, I won't name names, but I saw on Blue Sky this past weekend, one person attending the event posted on Blue Sky and was like, can't wait to, be at this event this weekend, and I'm here in Baltimore in comfort. And they were at the Four Seasons in Baltimore. A nice picture of their, like, beautiful pillow. They had spent some money to be here because they could afford it, which is great. It's awesome. It's awesome that, like, that's an opportunity available to somebody. And somebody responded and said, that's really cool. Here's where I'm sleeping for the event. And it was some blankets in the back of their car, because they had basically driven to Baltimore and were like, I'll find somewhere to park my car and, like, sleep in my back seat because Cube is that important to me. And it's awesome that we can have people that are from such different walks of life, or such different places in their sort of life, that they can kind of still come together and share this space. And I have no doubt that everybody that is at the event has no interest in, like, you don't come to these events to steal cards. Like, if you wanted to do a crime, you would do something so much easier.
Buy Bitcoin.
Yeah, just do a crypto scam. Just do a rug pull if you're going to be a scam artist, right? So anyway, do you all have anything to add about the idea of security of cubes at these events?
I mean, it was definitely a little bit intimidating or nerve-wracking literally the first time, the first CubeCon, but yeah, I guess it's just gotten much more comfortable as it's been proven to me that this works, and that people, yeah, for the most part, or for the whole part, have the best interest of the community, and they're there to play and enjoy the cube, and they appreciate it. So I don't worry that much.
The system works. I have, many times, and just like you said, I don't attribute malice, but I'm counting players' cards back out and like, yeah, this is 44. Think about your games. Did you lose control of anything at any time?
Yeah, did you have something under an Oblivion Ring or whatever?
They're so commonly in someone else's deck. We had someone this weekend at Saltbox who was like, I know it's Liliana the Veil. I don't think I lost control of it, but I cannot find it. I know it's Liliana the Veil. I'm so sorry. I don't know where it is. And I'm like, it's fine. We'll just look. There's still games going on. It could be one of their decks, or, and then I looked through, somebody had already done their check-in, and so the cards were in the box. Looked in the box. There it was, Liliana the Veil. And I was like, okay, yeah, you're all set. We'll just add this to your photo.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, it's really fine. Like, I don't think this was you doing something on purpose. Like, you obviously are very nervous.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, here it is. You're good. Don't worry. And
you ever get really into a niche Magic format and spend $65 on a ticket and travel to a city so you can steal one Liliana the Veil?
Right.
Like, does that make any sense to anybody?
And the greatest testament to the system, you are correct that nothing has ever actually fully gone missing, to my knowledge. But the closest call that I'm aware of is we had a player checked in, and either the judge didn't count or the player put the cards in the box themselves, which they're not supposed to do. But it was not a full pool. It was like 32 cards or something.
That's quite a bit smaller.
Sounds
And I was
like
like,
a sideboard's gone
interesting.
wayward.
Exactly. Spoilers. So I looked at their photo and I'm like, oh yeah, all like exactly these cards, which don't appear, they're like not the same color as the deck,
Right.
are what's missing.
It's all your bad cards on color and all your off-color cards.
It's like cheap cards that you would not even steal if you were in the mindset to. So the player's name is there. Gwen knows the player. It's like, hey, Gwen, reach out to this person. And they're like, yeah, I was in my box. I'm so sorry I took it with me. But yeah, I'll bring it back. And Gwen got the cards back and gave them to the owner. It's easy fix. Like just the system works. We have custody. We have a chain of custody with photos, and we know who to go to if something is missing.
Yeah. I mean, it helps also that everybody else is also doing the same check-in, because that even happened to me. One of my cubes, I counted out, it's like, oh no, I have 44 cards, and I panicked. And then my opponent, who I had just finished the last match with,
Oh
was
no,
just
I
like,
have 46
oh, no,
cards.
46.
And I
And it's like, oh yeah, here's your aura. Like, no problem.
Another common one, especially at CubeCon, where they had like black tablecloths and black carpet.
Oh,
was,
yeah.
My Snapcaster Mage from my cube was face down on the floor under the table, and we couldn't find it. Like, we counted the cube over and over and over, and like, where is it? It's just on the table, under the table, on face down.
I will finally take it to heart, your message. I think my next batch of sleeves before the next event is going to be a funky color that stands out on different carpets.
I know black is cold and efficient, but
Yeah, I've got my tastes.
So yeah, I mean, it's obviously not to say that like it is impossible that something could ever go wrong, but I think people's initial concerns are probably overblown given the actual values of these communities and the reasons that people come out to such a weird niche event. Like, it is not, no one is seeking to do a crime here. It is. And to be fair, like, the accidental stuff does come up, right? It's come up a bunch of times for me on Tuesday Cube nights. Just that's why I started counting cards, and I often have to tell people, like, I don't distress you. Like, I'm just doing this because, yeah, there was a card that was just face down on the carpet for a week, and then we found it the next week, right? And someone had stepped on it a couple times, right? Like, that kind of stuff can happen. So that's really what the soul system is actually in place for, right? Like, it also serves the purpose of, theoretically, if somebody was a bad actor, you'd have this, again, this chain of custody in place. But it's really in place just to make sure that, like, yeah, nobody's made an accidental good faith mistake, which is the most likely thing to happen to a card at an event like this. What else is on your notes, Bones? I feel like we've covered a lot of the sort of big questions here.
So I love to make slideshows, and I have a slideshow that I give to other judges for judging their own mid-sized cube events. At judge conferences, you may not know this, judges give presentations to each other that are usually about some topic, like within the rules, or topic within judging, like handling certain policies or handling certain infractions, that kind of thing. And then that used to be the way that judge promos were distributed. You would go to a conference, and then attending the conference got you a promo, and giving a presentation got you some kind of bonus.
Interesting.
Little trivia for you. That's where judge promos used to come from. So I put together my first ever slideshow about a topic I felt authority on. Was this, judging mid-sized cube events. So the other thing on my notes, beyond like how are these different from typical events, and what should you talk to the organizer about, my opening speech to players, which you have each heard many times over, is, these are not our cards. We're all going to treat these cards very well. We're going to shuffle gently, that kind of thing. And then explaining how Hedron Network works, and then explaining how this is different from other cube events, and this is at a very casual rules enforcement level. Then I give that spiel to the other judges. I also talk about the way that we manage time. Thomas at Cali Cube Champs had an excellent idea of using Excel to put up the round end times on a screen that was in the room, so that everyone, especially the judges, could see exactly when each of the cubes is going to end. And then I wanted to transfer that to Boston Cube Party, and I didn't have a screen, but I had a giant sticky note for some reason. So I used a giant sticky note on the wall with Sharpie to just write the round end times. And then Anthony came up with fantastic software that we were able to use at this event that has you type in what time this round ends, and it has a live timer ticking down for all of the tables for where, like, how much time each of them has left. So managing time is hugely important. That's a piece of advice I give to other judges, and that's also an example of the way that the community has kind of evolved over time. Like, we need a way to track these different round end times, and we have different ways of solving that problem. A couple other things in my notes are just tips for people, and that kind of covers something we were just talking about. Common Hedron Network questions like, I won my pod, but it doesn't say I have a trophy, or can I draft with my friend? Like, I have the tips for answering that and how to solve that. The common cube event issues are what we just talked about. Another player's card is in my deck. What do I do? Or I'm missing a card and I think it's in their deck. What do we do? My favorite one that I have never seen happen anywhere else, and I actually don't know if favorite is the right word because it's kind of a nightmare. But,
Your favorite worst nightmare.
my favorite worst nightmare.
Some people like scary movies, you know?
It's never come up except at these events, and it somehow came up at 2 of these events. We were drafting pack 2, and they picked up my pack 3.
Yeah,
and
this happened
started
on coverage at
drafting it.
CubeCon, yeah.
Oh no, really?
Yeah.
So like I have in the document the solution to like, well, we're gonna have 7 packs in pack 3, and be more careful. And I'm sorry.
Yeah,
like
sometimes there's no good fix,
Yeah, like,
and you just got to roll with
those
it.
15 cards have gone around the table, or however many cards they were. And the person who started that, who got the first pick out of it, they do not get a pack this round. They have already made a first pick from this pack, and
Right.
it is now gone.
So I always encourage people at our like weekly cube night to put something on top of their
Yes.
packs, whether that's a dice or their phone or a pen or
Or a nice rock.
a nice
that-
rock that I won from the Jund Cube. Is that something that you recommend as well?
Absolutely, yeah. Any little, we call them pack guards, to put on will help prevent this. And like, you're all gonna be playing the same sleeves. So
I was going to say, that's why it happens at these events, is
Right.
that if
Yeah.
you're doing a booster draft, the booster pack
And-
is sealed. You
Yeah.
have to open
Right.
it consciously to know what's happening.
So you have to, like, your packs will be in a face down pile, and in pack 2 you'll have another face down pile.
There's
with equal size.
the most dangerous moment in the
Yeah,
draft where you
yeah.
have 3 equally sized piles in front of you that all are different.
So you can use a die, you can use a medallion or your phone. My favorite that I have seen is a Bionicle, which is just sitting on top of the...
Yep.
Love that.
I also
I
have a
believe
little
that's Tom with the Bionicle, if I'm not
Believe
mistaken.
so.
Yeah.
Nice. I also have for some of my cubes a little card that has like a link to the cube with a QR code
Yes.
and some rules clarifications, and so that's something else I encourage people to use as a pack guard. I like that term.
But yeah, that's my my little slideshow is like a living document that I continue updating with things that I've learned over the course of the events. But that's something I'm very happy to share with anyone who wants to know about judging the events, or like as an organizer, if you are going to hire your own local judge to help you with the event, if there's things that they want to know that could be helpful. So just reach out if you need something.
Yeah, I mean, I should say that you have been very willing to travel and judge Cube events. So if someone is interested in organizing their own and wants to have you as the head judge, they can reach out to you. And as you graciously just offered, even if you're not judging the event, if someone has questions, you are ever the community resource to help these things happen.
Absolutely.
I want to cover just a couple other logistical things. So first of all, I should say, too, there is a Discord server. I think it's fine to mention this exists. If you're interested in organizing a Cube event,
Just spoiling the super secret Discord server.
it's not super secret, but I mean, it's not a public server. It is a server of people that are interested in organizing or have organized their own Cube events. And if you are serious about trying to organize one and you want to be able to talk to other people that have done it before, get at me or Bones or Anthony, and we'll get you invited to that server and get you involved there. So that's a great place where you can actually get connected with people that have made these decisions themselves in their own local communities. I will say, from talking to a bunch of these people, I know that space is usually the hardest question to answer. If you don't have a readily available space that is just primed and ready to use, even a good-sized local game store usually can accommodate 72 people, in pods all weekend. So a lot of community spaces have been used. Max's mother is the head pastor at a church, and we got to use this fantastic room at this church this past
space, to be
weekend,
honest.
which was, I mean, honestly, the best space I've ever been to a Cube event in. It was like really, really great. So you do have to get a little creative, I think, with how you find the space, and that's probably the sort of biggest question mark if you're thinking of organizing your own event. And then there are avenues to find judges to help you out. I would say the other thing that I want to mention too is that I think collecting payment for ticketing is the thing that people don't necessarily have perfect solutions for yet, and that everyone's tried different things. And I know Max used Eventbrite, and Eventbrite was not great, just took a bunch of fees, and also apparently held all of the money for all the ticket sales until 3 days after the event, which means that Max just had to float all of the costs until 3 days after the event closed.
Yeah, that's not great.
No, not great. I know that Scott has just done like email me and then we'll like set up a thing through Venmo, like very, very sort of unstructured, which is also an option. The thing that I think is probably going to be the best solution moving forward is something that Gwen has done a couple of times. It's actually what we did for both the products we've sold, the prints for the first CubeCon and also the playmats, which is just setting up a Stripe payment page. So if you don't know, Stripe is a service that many companies or websites use to process credit card payments on their site. It's an API you can embed and do a bunch of coding to make work. But they also have just sort of no technical knowledge required ability to set up a payment page. And you have very little control over what it looks like, but you could just basically set up a page and then get all the email addresses of people that like paid an amount of money. It's very, very sort of simple. but it also has like very little fees associated with it, and the money just goes right into your account. So I would say if that's the other question that's like keeping you from being excited about trying to organize an event like this, check out just setting up a Stripe payment page and see if that might solve your problems.
Something else that's been, I think, pretty standard at all these events, and I'm curious if you think this is just a requirement, is having a Discord server where people can both get announcements and information about the event, but then also coordinate housing and carpooling and finding dinners and other activities. So would you wrap that up into the essentials?
I think something like that is very necessary. I know Scott does the Upkeep events within the Upkeep server, which is their weekly Cube night server. It's like a channel within that. But you need some way to communicate.
Some channel for
Absolutely.
communication, yeah.
Like just a pinned announcements is huge. It's like, what's the address again? What time's the first draft again? Like, you don't want to be answering this over and over, and you don't necessarily want a website. You made a very excellent
website. I think
website.
That is one thing that I wish was a little bit more standard. Was I just want a page that has address, times, list of cubes, like links to other essential things. We shouldn't get into my big feelings about the way that the web works, but honestly, I don't want to volunteer myself too much, but if people want help setting up something simple, maybe we can figure out a way to make that happen, because like a little informational page I think does go a long way.
Yeah, but yeah, there are certainly questions of like, I'm going to get a hotel. Does anyone want to split a hotel? And I'm traveling from this location that's within an hour. We can split a ride, that kind of thing.
Or carpool from the airport if we're getting in at a similar time.
Yeah, very common type of discussion that happens around these events. And so, yeah, I think a Discord is a great way to support those. I guess I won't go so far as to call it essential, but something in that vein is essential.
I'll say I think you need a really good reason to not use Discord, frankly.
Yeah.
It is so well established in the community, at least maybe that's a little bit of confirmation bias because that is my exposure to the community is largely through Discord. But I mean, even just being at these events, like, tons of people are active in the Discord and, people know that it exists. And it is kind of, I think, Anthony, you and I, if the internet turned out to be the internet we wanted, then everyone would have a nice little simple web page and it would do everything it's supposed to do.
URLs would work.
But the internet's not what we wanted it to be when we first sort of got exposed to it in, 1998. So instead, I think a Discord server is really the most elegant solution unless you have a really good reason not to do it that way. So yeah, I think that's a really, really good idea. And we maintain a events page on our website that has the name, location, dates, and information for any events, any Cube events. And Discord server URL is is the last field. It is the last most important thing, and some events don't do it, and I honestly think they should, and most of them just do it. It also means that if you plan on running it again, then you often have people that are just still members of the server. They haven't been, checking it regularly, but if you decide to run it back, like Boston Cube Party just did an announcement that nobody had been super active in that server really for months, and they were like, guess what, we're bringing it back. And half the people are already there, right?
Yeah.
They're already in that server, which is really nice.
I'm collecting Discords like I'm collecting trophy pins.
Okay, wow, sick brag, brother.
It's so many Discords.
Getting a trophy pin is as easy for me as joining a Discord. It's so simple. It's easy for me to do.
That's says Mr. Triple Boston Cube Party Pin.
I wish I had your diversity more than my one good weekend and my other scrub weekends, So I think that kind of covers all the essential stuff, and I want to underline that if this sounds appealing to you, if you've considered running a Cube event locally, I would encourage you to give it a try, right? I think all told, the risks are like pretty minimal. Like, you got to make sure you don't get too out over your skis in terms of like the costs and end up maybe biting the bullet if you can't sell all your tickets or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, you could always, just like we say with cubes, start small.
Yeah, I would definitely say start small. I mean, the smallest Cube events that we've posted on our website are just, like 4 pods, and that's a very reasonable size that one judge can very easily handle without, a bunch of logistics. And you probably could put at almost any local game store. You could probably fit, 4 pods.
Boston Cube Party 2 also didn't go all the way to 200 initially. They were at like 108 or something.
Yeah, they kept it small, and then as they sold out, we're like, I guess we can support more.
Here's a wait list, and then the wait list got so big that they started doing research into like, okay, can we support, a larger number, and then expanded. So definitely your community is also going to have some part in shaping the size of your event.
Yeah, for sure. And it doesn't have to be big to be great. I think, honestly, some of the smaller Cube events are the ones I've had the most fun at, so I don't feel like your event is not as good if it's only 48 players instead of 64 or 72 or whatever.
And you're not going to get 100% attendance. It's just not
Oh, yeah.
possible.
I mean, I guess that's the thing you should just know if you are organizing any event, right? You should plan for 5 to 10% of the paid ticketed attendees to just not show up. And there are, I think if you are doing it right, you should probably, account for that, right? Like, If you want 72 people there, sell 75 tickets. It's guaranteed 3 people are not going to show up at least, right? And you can maybe even be a little more ambitious with that if you have a little bit of overflow in case more people do show up. But yeah, that's just going to happen. That's just how these things go.
We've had a couple times where one of the organizers or one of the friends of the organizers who doesn't intend to play is just there. And then we have like a pot of 7 and you're like, okay, I'll sit in.
Yeah.
And then like, yeah, I'm fine. I can do this without you.
I mean, that's maybe also something to point out about Hedron Network is, from what I understand, it's extremely flexible. So you have the option of manually making a lot of those hot fixes in the background and, putting an extra person in. Or, I mean, like you mentioned, also having 2 people, if you show up with a friend that they're not necessarily comfortable playing with a bunch of strangers, you can sneak them in a pod if that's really necessary.
Yeah, I have a lot of control during the staging process of seeing what it's going to look like, swapping people around if they requested to be with a certain person, or knock on wood, like avoid a certain person. There are ways that I can do a lot of manipulation before it goes live.
So I'll say here, as we're talking to a big audience, don't just make requests to play with your friends because it would be kind of nice for you. Like, don't let this turn into a bunch of requests to judges running Hedron Network events to just move things around. I would say use that power judiciously.
Yeah, this is definitely just like my friend is scared to play alone.
Right.
Or my friend is only willing to draft this cube because they don't know any other cards and they really want to try it but are too scared to like play any other cube. Make sure they get in this pod, right? Like that kind of stuff. You just kind of want this, so please make it happen.
There are a few guarantees that we can make, but we can be quite accommodating. Yeah. It's like you said, Anthony, very flexible software.
And I mean, that's just come from, Hedron Network has probably been running a dozen plus events at this point. So every time, there's feedback, a little bit of iteration, just gets better and better and better. So I want to close I want each of us to give 1 or 2 subjective, just personal preference tips for people if they're organizing their own event for what you'd like to see out of the event. And I'll start just by saying that these events all started as 3 drafts per day. That was what the original CubeCon was, and it seemed to make sense. Like, all right, well, let's just squeeze in as much cube as we can, right? It's the cube event. And I think over time, it's more and more sort of being acknowledged that the right number of drafts per day is 2 drafts per day. And that might seem like a bummer if you're just having a 2-day event that you can only have 4 drafts or whatever, but I think 2 drafts a day is the right number. And my tips would be, 1, start earlier than you think you have to. I think some people will grumble about an early start, but by the time it is 10 a.m. and they've already gotten their draft done or whatever, they're going to feel so much better when they get to go to lunch at a reasonable time and like the whole schedule doesn't get messed up than they will about having to like grumble about getting up early. And then I think 2 structured drafts per day, and then having that 3rd slot that would be like the evening post-dinner draft at other cube events. Just be sort of, if you want to draft, maybe there's some free play area, maybe there's a local game store you sort of shunt people to, but I think a lot of players just do not have a 3rd draft in that day, and having the sort of structured option to I'm just going to check out and just go eat dinner or go hang out with my friends or do whatever, I think that's the right number for me for a cube event.
Wow, let's all go around and give a tip. Here's all of the tips that could be given.
I gave 1 tip. I said start early and do two drafts per day. I know what your tip was going to be. I didn't want to steal it from you.
Wait, what's my tip?
What's your tip about every Magic event ever?
Have fun?
Don't schedule anything over meal times. Leave time for lunch. Food is really important. Go ahead, do the thing. How did you not know that was going to be your tip?
Okay, no, my tip was going to be, famously, I've skipped a lot of 3rd drafts because I just know I can't do that. So that would be my main tip. But then, building off of that, I do think some people do want the 3rd round. I finally did get to participate in a top 8 because there were only 2 rounds in a day, and that was amazing. And I think what was great was that there was that 3rd round where the people who really wanted it could opt into it. I think there were even still pins given out, so it still felt like there was some investment, but the overall championship was not about a test of stamina of can you participate in 3 drafts in a weekend or in a day, but, can you play a normal amount of Magic? Not even normal. It's so much. But also, meals are important. Players, like you said, Bones have needs, and food is a big one.
Bones do have needs.
Leave space for meals.
Calcium, that kind of stuff.
And then I think sort of also building off of what you said, Andy, having a plan for what that sort of like after party extracurricular activities. So even if it's not super structured, it's like, here's a good place for us all to meet up for another round is really, really valuable.
For the Cube sickos.
For the sickos. I kind of wish I was there for more of the Turbo Cube draft that happened because I was getting live updates from Roja and it was hilarious.
I mean, honestly, getting live updates from Roja is probably more entertaining than watching it yourself, to be perfectly honest.
Somebody was quoted for saying, drafting this cube is like trying to draft a kidney stone.
Yikes.
I was like, okay.
I don't know what that means, but you gonna put that on the Cube Cobra description?
Absolutely, yeah. 5 stars. Great pain.
Both things have passing involved.
Worst terrible nightmare. Favorite worst terrible nightmare.
My tip is segues off of yours. Look at us. Is about player needs, and it is to have water, ideally in the room, would be excellent. I love whenever there's like a cooler that you can access, and little snacks whenever you don't have time for food, or it's you had to miss breakfast because you were running late, and so you got to make it till lunch. Just having like chips. As the organizer, you can go a long way with a Costco run. I was very impressed with that at Boston Cube Party.
You spend like $100 at Costco, right? Which might be the cost of like 2 or 3 tickets, and you can have enough snacks for the entire room.
Yeah, and then
very, very safely.
And then your judges get to eat them too. That goes a long way toward players feeling good over the course of the day. They don't have like the little hangry, like, I just have to make it through another round so I can get to lunch.
It is funny how just if you take an entire room of people and make them all 10% hangrier, that's going to lead to so much more conflict and like confusion and frustration that you could just solve with like a little thing of mini packs of Oreos, and that problem just goes away.
I love to picture someone saying, Judge, this happened, we messed up, and you saying, you know what you need? A snack. This is how we resolve this issue.
How do we feel now?
Okay.
Shoving more cookies into their mouth. You remain angry. Continue to eat the cookies.
The cookies shall continue until morale improves.
All right. I hope this was helpful, and I hope there were some people out there that were maybe on the cusp. They've been thinking about maybe I'm going to try and do this, that are now at least committed to looking into the next steps. Maybe like starting to ask around their town about potential venues, or talking to some other organizers that have done this in the past that are willing to share their experience, because this is what I want Magic to be. This is what I want the future Magic to be. I want more of these events in more places. I want to be able to tour the country and the world just going to these little cube events. The community has started to sort of settle on a format that really works. And so there's a lot of things you don't have to do, right? Like Hedron Network is incredible. There is so much sort of practice and iteration that has already been done on the sort of structure of events that works, that a lot of these questions are answered for you. You're going in with a lot fewer unknowns than the first couple people that just like did this with no real understanding if it would work at all.
Shout out Joe.
Shout out to Joe. Joe's a perfect example of the kind of person. I love, we need these people in society that are just like, I'm just going to do the thing, right? And I am not that person anymore. I was when I was younger. These days, I'm the guy that's like, here's all the things that could go wrong, and that's why I will not do the thing. But some people need to just say, I see all those things that could go wrong, and I'm just going to ignore them and fly in the face of them and, just try something. And so we need the Joes out there, but you don't have to be the Joe anymore. The Joe has already been the Joe. So now you can be the whoever you are who can use all of this information that the community has already sort of gathered to help run an event like this.
I would love to see an event in Colorado, Texas, or Kansas City, so I don't have to fly as far.
Are there any other cities you'd like to visit that you're willing to fly to? You just love to see someone in I'll go to a Cube event in Paris. Somebody put one there so I can visit Paris again. That would be great.
Apparently the French Cube event, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, is taking place in a castle.
Yeah, I don't think it's
not a public event.
It is known that it publicly happens, but it is invite only. You are not allowed to go to Cube Castle, and I think that or Cube Chateau. I think it's called Cube Castle. Anyway, that one's a very different kind of thing. These ones are open to the public because we're nice.
Wow.
Anyway,
because we don't have a monarchy.
They famously don't too. Pretty famously,
there was I don't know if you remember this thing that happened.
Because we never had a monarchy.
Well,
oh man.
No, what a downer. All right, well, before the vibes get too bad, we're going to end this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. Bones, this has been a true honor. There are a few people for whom I think your contribution to this community is just incredible. Like, you need your flowers while you are still here, because if you were to like be vaporized or abducted by aliens tomorrow, people would just spend years talking about how great Bones was for this community. And so here's your flowers while you're still here. I think here's a tip for you. I think if you just started a Patreon that said, I am Bones and I help judges run local Cube events, I'm donating to that thing. That's the kind of thing that I would definitely give money to like help support this community, because you're doing more than a lot of other people in more public sort of facing roles to help this community exist. So thank you for that, and thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
I saw you shake your head about starting a Patreon.
If I do get vaporized, there will still be cubes for my boys.
All right. That's the end of this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. All of our music is produced by DJ James Nasty. All the magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast. If we got any card text wrong on this episode, no, we didn't, because Judge Bones is right here. We wouldn't have gotten any card text wrong, so you're the one that's wrong. This podcast is produced by Thinking Really Hard About Magic Cards and organizing local Cube events and speaking into microphones about it. Anthony and Bones, thank you for the gift of friendship and for the gift of Cube.
Thank you both for making Cube events happen. It's been great.
Thank you for coming. Couldn't do it without you. And now, bum, 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 outro sound.
You want the song at the outro? Intro? Well, what should I do with my Judge Bones stinger? Should I make a new one for the intro that's even better?
It should just be nonstop in the background.
Oh.
Dun, 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 dun. Just go the whole time in the background. Just the Night Court theme constantly. How quiet would that have to be to not be hugely distracting?
You mentioned you had some favorite weird interactions that would never happen outside of a Cube event. Can we just get like one or two of those?
Give us the sign off. Give us the sign off.
Yeah, I've written them down. Okay, so my favorite one from New York was Illuna, which is a mutate creature.
Yep.
And Volo, which is a guide to monsters. Every time you cast a creature spell that doesn't share a creature type with something you already have in play or in your graveyard, you copy it. So creature spells don't normally have targets, but mutate creature spells do.
They sure do.
So Volo doesn't say you may choose new targets. Why would he? Creature spells don't normally have targets.
That would be weird.
You have a mutated Illuna with a copy of Illuna above it.
But they're legendary.
Legendary, but it's one permanent. So the copy resolves first. You get your mutate trigger, and then the original resolves. It gets an additional instance of when this mutates trigger.
Which is on Illuna.
So you get a total of 3 triggers. And the legend rule doesn't matter because it's one permanent.
I bet the player was smiling ear to ear when you told them how that interaction worked, because they were like, does this do exactly what I want to do?
The player and their opponent wanted to know what would happen, and after I explained it, the opponent murdered it. So instead, they got a copy of Illuna with no trigger, and then the original Illuna and the legend rule did apply, also no trigger.
No.
Just the hugest blowout possible.
We just want to know what, just out of curiosity. That reminds me, this weekend, I saw somebody sort of grinning saying, have you ever seen somebody pay 3 for a lightning bolt? And then gestured at the 2 Thalias on their opponent's side of the battlefield. And I was like, no, and I don't think I'm going to see it happen right here either, because those
on
are
account of the 2 Thalias.
Another one that I think is just very Cube specific is there's a conspiracy called Emissary's Ploy.
Oh, I'm familiar.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with it. I'm maybe more familiar than most judges because...
That's another weird thing about these Cube events. You don't normally have to judge conspiracy cards, huh?
So people have asked me, like, if I'm escaping Kroxa, do I still get to use mana of any color if I chose 2? And if I kick Turok, is the kicker also mana of any color?
Escaping, no, right? Because that's not... it is casting.
It is casting.
Escaping is casting. So you would get to do it with escaping.
That's crazy.
Turok, I'm going to say no, you can't use the mana of any color for the kicker.
Mana value is still 2.
But the kicker costs...
Is part of casting the spell.
Well, see, this is why I'm not a judge.
There you go. And then at Philly, we had a player who had Dress Down in their hand. You're going to love this.
I do love anything that begins with Dress Down in someone's hand.
The opponent activates the unearth ability of Phyrexian Dragon Engine. And they have Dress Down in their hand. So if they play Dress Down now, the Dragon Engine will enter with no abilities, but gain haste. So they don't draw any cards, but it gains haste. So they can attack. If they wait and Dragon Engine enters...
Gets the ETB.
The triggers on the stack, then you can Dress Down and it loses haste.
Okay.
So they have to. The dress down player can't blow out them entirely, but they can choose: do you draw cards or do you get to attack?
Dress Down is so good.
Dress Down's really cool.
God, I love that card.
The last one that I have on my notes is I have gotten the privilege of watching my cubes be played several times at events, and I have just seen multiple Laboratory Maniac stacks. I just hate Thassa's Oracle because Labman is so cool, and Thassa just makes it easy mode. Like, if you remove it, too bad, I still win. So I watched Lincoln, shout out Kapernamov, playing...
Is that how it's pronounced?
Yeah.
Great.
Playing in the Ancient Desert. Here's a free one for you. Deinonychus.
I know that one now. Okay, give me a break.
So Lincoln has 1 card in library and flashes back Faithless Looting from the graveyard with Labman in play. The opponent Essence fluxes to flicker their Flicker Wisp, to blink their Flicker Wisp, to exile Labman. To kill Lincoln, basically.
Yep.
And Lincoln, in response, casts Snapcaster Mage, flashback Mental Note, then mill and draw in response.
Awesome.
So like a stack of I'm going to win, you're going to lose, I'm going to win instead.
And actually I'm going to win for real. And I'm going to win with Mental Note, no less.
And that's not the first time. The very first time I saw Patrick playing at CubeCon was also in my Desert Cube, and Patrick had like Living Death or something and brought the entire graveyard back, and Labman was there and like figured out how to cycle down to 1 card in library or like to 0 cards in library, but could not figure out a way to do the final draw. Like got so close and then couldn't do it, and then was like trying to figure out how to win on board, but also couldn't do it. It was like amazing to watch this huge puzzle happen. But anyway, this is just a love letter to Laboratory Maniac instead of answering rules questions.
Should I put Laboratory Maniac in my Sacred Geometry Cube?
Yeah, maybe. Do you have ways to get your library empty efficiently?
I have cards that say draw a card.
Do you have 30?
Yeah, probably.
Oh, knowing you,